My name is Lily Matthews, and I was 12 years old. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that my life was perfectly normal. I loved drawing in my sketchbook, riding my bike through the neighborhood, and playing with my dog, Rusty. But one day, everything changed. That was the day I learned that I was dying. It started with me feeling tired all the time, not the kind of tired that goes away with a nap, but a heavy exhaustion that made even getting out of bed feel impossible. My mom noticed the bruises first, strange dark spots on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain. She brushed my hair one morning and clumps came out in her hands. I'll never forget the way her face fell, her eyes wide with fear. The doctor's office smelled like disinfectant and the air felt too still. My mom sat beside me, gripping my hand tightly as if her strength could somehow protect me from whatever the doctor was about to say. "Lily," he began, his voice soft, "the tests show you have leukemia. It's advanced." I didn't fully understand, but I knew it was bad. My mom started crying right there in the office, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the kind of fear you get from a thunderstorm or a scary movie. This was different. "Am I going to die?" I asked. My voice sounded small, even to me. The doctor hesitated before answering. "We're going to do everything we can," he said, but I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't really believe it. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling. My chest felt tight, not from pain, but from the weight of the question I couldn't shake. What happens when you die? Is it just nothing? I wasn't ready for nothing. At first, everyone tried to act like things were normal. My mom would make my favorite dinners, even though I had no appetite. My dad worked late, like always, but he started checking on me in the middle of the night, his shadow standing silently in my doorway. My older brother, Ethan, avoided me. I think he didn't know what to say, so he said nothing at all. Even my friends at school treated me differently. Their laughter felt forced, their smiles didn't reach their eyes. I couldn't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say to someone like me either. I overheard my mom on the phone one night, crying as she whispered, "She's just a child." I hated hearing her like that. I hated knowing I was the reason. But most of all, I hated not knowing how much time I had left. The days blurred together after the diagnosis. Treatments started quickly. Chemotherapy, the doctors called it. I called it torture. The needles, the endless hours in the hospital, the way my body felt weaker and weaker with every session. It all felt like a cruel joke. I tried to stay strong for my family's sake. My mom, Emily, always put on a brave face, but I could see the cracks. I could see the way her hands shook when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she clung to every word the doctor said, as if they held the power to rewrite my fate. The worst part was watching how it changed everyone around me. My dad threw himself into work, but he came home every night looking more tired than me. Ethan barely spoke to me anymore. He'd always been the cool older brother, but now he looked at me like I was a ghost. One night, as my mom tucked me into bed, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Mom," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what do you think happens when we die?" She froze, her hand still resting on my blanket. For a moment, I thought she might not answer. Then she said, I think it's like waking up from a dream, a beautiful dream." I nodded, but her words didn't comfort me. Because what if the dream wasn't beautiful? What if it was just dark, endless nothing? I didn't say it out loud, but I think she could see the fear in my eyes. As my body grew weaker, the dreams started. At first, they were just flashes of light, warm, golden, and soothing. Then I began to hear voices, soft and melodic, like a song I couldn't quite remember. I wanted to stay in those dreams forever. They felt safe, peaceful, like the fear and pain couldn't touch me there. The night before I slipped into unconsciousness, my family gathered around my bed. My mom held my hand tightly. My dad stood silently at the foot of the bed, and Ethan sat in the corner, his head bowed. The room was so quiet I could hear the sound of my own breathing, slow and labored. "I'm scared," I whispered. My mom leaned closer, tears streaming down her face. "I know, baby," she said, "but you're not alone. We're here." Her words lingered in the air as the light from my dreams began to fill the edges of my vision, and then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I expected to see my bedroom ceiling, my mom's worried face, or the pale fluorescent lights of the hospital. Instead, I was surrounded by a radiant golden glow. The air itself seemed alive, humming with a warm energy that pressed gently against my skin. It wasn't like anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. Peace, love, safety. I looked down at my hands and gasped. They were glowing, faintly translucent, like I was made of the same light that surrounded me. There was no pain here, no heaviness in my chest, no ache in my bones. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was free. I stood on a path that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, winding through fields of soft, rolling light. The ground wasn't grass, but it shimmered, alive with colors that shifted as I moved. Flowers that seemed carved from starlight dotted the landscape, their petals pulsing faintly as if they were breathing. The sky above wasn't blue, it was every color at once, swirling and dancing in patterns I couldn't begin to describe. "Where am I?" I whispered. My voice sounded strange, clearer and fuller than it had ever been. "You are safe, child," a voice answered, soft and melodic. I turned to see a figure standing a few feet away. At first, they were just a silhouette against the glowing backdrop, but as they stepped closer, I could see them clearly. They looked almost human, but not quite. Their face was serene, ageless, and their eyes shimmered with the same golden light that surrounded us. They wore robes that seemed woven from the fabric of the stars, and great shimmering wings extended behind them, though they didn't flap or move. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am your guide," they said gently. "I have come to walk with you." My guide held out their hand, and without hesitation, I took it. The touch was warm, calming, and I felt a surge of reassurance. Am I dead?" I asked. "In your world, yes," they replied. "But this is only the beginning." We walked together down the shimmering path, and as we moved, the light around us seemed to grow brighter, the warmth more intense. I didn't know where we were going, but I didn't feel afraid. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The peace didn't last. As we walked, the landscape began to change. The light dimmed, and the colors that had danced so freely in the air began to fade. The warmth in the air gave way to a creeping chill, and I felt a knot of unease form in my stomach. "What's happening?" I asked, gripping my guide's hand tightly. "There is something you must see," they said, their voice calm but tinged with sorrow. "Not all truths are easy to bear." The shimmering path led us to a vast expanse, and in the center stood a throne. It was unlike anything I could have imagined, towering and awe-inspiring, carved from a material that looked like crystal but pulsed with its own inner light. The throne radiated power, and seated upon it was a figure whose presence filled the entire space. I couldn't see their face. It was obscured by a brilliant light that made it impossible to look directly at them. But I felt their presence, and it was overwhelming. It wasn't just love or warmth, it was everything. Creation itself seemed to hum in response to their existence. "You are here to understand," the guide said, their voice soft. The throne shimmered, and suddenly the air around us shifted. Images began to appear, flashes of earth, of humanity. At first, they were beautiful. I saw people laughing, children playing, families gathered around tables. I saw oceans glistening under the sun, forests alive with movement, stars shining in the night sky. But then, the images changed. I saw greed, anger, and hatred. I saw war and destruction, entire cities crumbling under bombs. I saw faces twisted with pain, voices screaming in anguish. The earth itself seemed to weep as forests burned, oceans rose, and skies darkened with smoke. The warmth I had felt earlier was replaced by a cold dread. "Why are you showing me this?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. The figure on the throne spoke, their voice deep and resonant, like the echo of 1,000 storms. These are the consequences of humanity's choices. This is the world as it is, shaped by the neglect of truth and the rejection of love. The images grew darker, more horrifying. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My guide placed a hand on my shoulder. "You have been chosen, Lily," they said. "You must carry this message back to the world. Humanity must remember what it has forgotten." The weight of their words pressed down on me. "Why me?" I whispered. "I'm just a kid. What can I do?" "You are more than you realize," the guide said. "Your voice will carry the truth. Your journey will inspire change." The light from the throne flared, brighter than ever before, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the responsibility I had been given. I didn't know how, but I understood that my life had a purpose greater than I had ever imagined. And then everything went dark. The golden light that had filled me with warmth and comfort was fading. The path beneath my feet seemed less solid, its shimmering surface now dull and cracked. I clutched my guide's hand tighter, my pulse quickening. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You are being shown what lies beyond the surface," they replied, their voice calm but tinged with sadness. "Not all who pass through this realm find peace." As we walked, the landscape shifted again. The once vibrant flowers wilted, their radiant petals curling and turning to ash. Shadows lengthened, stretching and twisting unnaturally across the ground. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest, and the gentle hum of energy was replaced by faint murmurs, voices, distant and mournful. Ahead of us, figures began to emerge from the shadows. They were faint at first, barely visible against the dimming light, but as we moved closer, their shapes became clearer. They were human, at least they had been. Their forms were ghostly, translucent, as though they were only half there. Their faces were etched with sorrow, their eyes empty yet piercing. They moved aimlessly, some pacing, others sitting with their heads in their hands. "Who are they?" I whispered, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "These are the restless souls," my guide said softly. "They are neither condemned nor in paradise. They are trapped in between, a limbo of their own making." I hesitated, watching as one figure turned toward me. It was a woman, her face streaked with phantom tears. She reached out, her hand trembling as though she wanted to touch me but couldn't. "Why are you here?" I asked her, my voice quivering. Her lips moved, but her voice was barely audible, as if carried on a distant breeze. "I waited too long," she said. "I denied what I knew in my heart. Now I linger here, caught between what could have been and what never was." The voices grew louder as more figures gathered around me, their whispers overlapping. I was too afraid to believe. I thought I had more time. I turned away when the truth was in front of me. Their words were like shards of ice, cutting into me with every regret they shared. I could feel their pain, their deep longing for something they could no longer reach. "This is what indecision and denial lead to," my guide said. "A life unfulfilled, a soul unable to move forward." I wanted to comfort them, to tell them it wasn't too late, but I knew the truth. They were beyond my reach, and their pain, their endless yearning, was unbearable. The path led us away from the restless souls, but the weight of their words stayed with me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't shake the image of their hollow eyes, their desperate whispers echoing in my mind. I wanted to cry, to scream, but my guide's steady presence kept me grounded. We came to a vast open space where the light was almost completely gone. The air was cold and the silence was eerie, broken only by the faint rustling of unseen winds. In the distance, I saw a massive screen, or perhaps it was a window, suspended in the darkness. It pulsed faintly as though alive. "You must see what lies ahead," my guide said. What happens if humanity continues down its current path? I didn't want to look. My body froze, my heart pounding in my chest, but the screen flickered to life, and I had no choice but to watch. At first, the images were of Earth as I knew it, bustling cities, families laughing, children playing, but the scenes began to shift. The cities crumbled, consumed by violence and chaos. People screamed and ran as fires raged. Buildings collapsed and streets flooded. The air was thick with smoke, the sky darkened by storms that tore through everything in their path. I saw people divided, turning on one another with hatred in their eyes. Greed and corruption ruled, and the cries of the innocent were drowned out by the roar of war and destruction. The earth itself seemed to rebel. Rivers dried up, forests burned, and the ground cracked open, swallowing entire towns. "Stop!" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, make it stop!" But the images continued. I saw children starving, their frail bodies trembling as they clung to life. I saw animals fleeing as their habitats were destroyed, oceans littered with plastic and death. The suffering was endless, the pain overwhelming. This is the future humanity is creating, my guide said. A world consumed by its own greed and neglect, but it is not too late. The screen went dark, and I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. "Why are you showing me this?" I cried. "What can I do? I'm just a kid." "You are more than you think," my guide said, kneeling beside me. "The message you carry is powerful. It can inspire change, ignite hope. Humanity must remember its connection to the divine, its responsibility to each other and the world." I looked up at them, my chest heaving. What if they don't listen? What if nothing changes? "That is not for you to decide," they said. "Your task is to share what you have seen, to be a beacon of truth. The rest is up to them." I wiped my tears and nodded, though the weight of the vision pressed heavily on my soul. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to try. For the restless souls, for the earth, for all of us. The air around me shifted once more, growing warmer and softer, as though the world itself was wrapping me in an embrace. The oppressive weight of the visions I had just witnessed lingered, but the light that now surrounded me carried a sense of purpose. My guide stood before me, their gaze steady, their expression filled with both sorrow and hope. "You have seen what must be avoided," they said, their voice resonating through my entire being. "Now, you must carry this truth back to the world." I took a shaky step back, my chest tightening. "Back? You mean I have to leave here? But what can I do? I'm just a kid. No one will listen to me." The figure approached, their hand resting gently on my shoulder. "It is precisely because of your innocence, your pure heart, that you have been chosen. The message you carry is not yours alone. It comes from a higher truth." My mind raced. The images of destruction and suffering still burned in my memory. The weight of what I'd seen was unbearable, and the idea of returning to a world that had created such devastation filled me with fear. "But they won't believe me," I whispered. "What if they think I'm crazy? What if nothing changes?" The figure knelt before me, their wings shimmering faintly in the dim light. "Truth is not always easy to hear, Lily, but even the smallest voice can ignite a flame. You are not returning alone. The light will guide you, and those who are ready will listen." Tears welled in my eyes. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not someone stronger, someone who can handle this?" The figure smiled, their expression full of understanding. "Strength is not measured by age or size, Lily. It is measured by the courage to act, even when you are afraid. And you, child, have the strength to change hearts." I closed my eyes, letting their words sink in. A deep part of me knew they were right, but I couldn't shake the fear. "What if I fail?" I asked. The figures stood, their light growing brighter. Failure is not the end. The seed of truth will be planted and it will grow in its own time. Trust in the path you are given. The light around me grew so intense that it felt as though the entire realm was dissolving. My guide's voice was the last thing I heard. Your time has not yet come. Return and carry the message. The first thing I felt was pain. A deep, aching throb in my chest that pulled me from the endless light. My lungs burned as though I had been holding my breath underwater for far too long. My eyelids fluttered, and a blinding, sterile brightness replaced the golden glow of the otherworldly realm. "She's breathing!" a voice exclaimed, distant yet frantic. "We've got her back!" My vision cleared slowly, and I saw faces hovering over me. Doctors, nurses, my mom. Their expressions were a mix of shock, relief, and disbelief. I felt cold, the hospital sheets damp with sweat, and the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor filled the room. "Lily!" my mom cried, grabbing my hand tightly. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice trembling with joy. "Oh my God, Lily, you're alive!" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and my voice came out as a raspy whisper. "Mom!" The doctors were talking, their words a blur, something about how my heart had stopped for several minutes, how I should not have come back. "It's a miracle," one of them said, shaking his head in disbelief. I've never seen anything like this. But I wasn't focused on them. I was still feeling the pull of the other place, the lingering warmth of the light, and the weight of the message I had been given. It was all too much. My chest felt heavy, not from the physical pain, but from the knowledge I now carried. My dad entered the room, his face pale and shaken. He stood frozen for a moment, staring at me as though he couldn't believe I was really there. Then he rushed to my side, placing a trembling hand on my head. "Lily, you scared us," he said, his voice cracking. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide. He stayed back, leaning against the frame as though afraid to come closer. For the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. I wanted to tell them everything, to explain where I had been, what I had seen, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I describe the light, the voices, the throne, and the restless souls? How could I explain the visions of humanity's future and the message I had been given? As the doctors continued their tests, I remained quiet, staring at the ceiling. My family hovered around me, their relief palpable, but I could see the questions in their eyes. They knew something was different. And they were right. I wasn't the same girl I had been before. I had seen too much, learned too much. The world around me felt both familiar and foreign, and the weight of what I needed to do pressed heavily on my heart. That night, when the hospital room finally grew quiet, I closed my eyes. The faces of the restless souls appeared in my mind, their voices echoing softly, and then I heard my guide's words once more. "You are not alone. Trust in the path." I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, the world felt different. The sunlight was brighter, the air sharper, and everything around me seemed to hum with life. But the weight of my experience pressed heavily on me, a constant reminder of what I had seen and the message I was meant to deliver. I couldn't keep it to myself, I knew that much. But the question haunted me. Would anyone believe me? The first time I tried to talk about it was with my mom. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the house unusually quiet. She poured me a glass of orange juice, her hands trembling slightly, as though she was still reeling from the fear of almost losing me. I took a deep breath and started to speak. "Mom," I said, my voice soft but steady, "I need to tell you something about what happened while I was gone." She looked up, her eyes wide and searching. "Gone," she repeated. "Lily, you were unconscious. The doctors—" "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "It wasn't just unconsciousness. I went somewhere, I saw things, and I was told to come back, to tell people what I saw." Her face softened with concern, but I could see the doubt creeping in. "Lily," she said gently, "you've been through so much. It's normal to have dreams or visions in situations like this." "It wasn't a dream," I said, louder than I intended. My heart pounded in my chest. "Mom, I saw heaven or something like it, and I saw what will happen if we don't change. I have to tell people." But her expression didn't change. She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't believe me. "Maybe we should talk to someone," she said. "A doctor or—" "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You don't understand. Nobody understands." I tried to explain it to Ethan next. He listened in silence, his arms crossed, his brow furrowed. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Lily," he said, "do you even hear how crazy this sounds? You almost died. That messes with your brain. You can't expect people to just believe this." His words stung, but I refused to give up. Over the next few weeks, I began sharing my story with anyone who would listen. Friends, teachers, even strangers. Most of them reacted the same way, with polite smiles or awkward silence. Some laughed, calling me a delusional kid. Others looked uncomfortable and quickly changed the subject. But not everyone dismissed me. A few people listened with wide eyes, their faces pale as I described the visions of humanity's future. A neighbor, Mrs. Harper, burst into tears after I spoke, gripping my hands and saying, "I feel it too, Lily. Something's wrong with the world. Maybe you really are here to wake us up." Word began to spread. People in town started whispering about the girl who came back from heaven. At first, I was scared of the attention, but then something incredible happened. Some of the people who heard my story began to act differently. They smiled more, they forgave old grudges, they reached out to others with kindness and generosity. And as I saw these small changes, I realized that the message was already making a difference. The changes started small. A neighbor mowing the lawn for an elderly widow, a friend helping another with homework without being asked. But soon, the ripple effect began to grow. At church, people started talking about forgiveness and compassion as if they truly meant it. The local food bank received so many donations that they had to ask for more volunteers to help organize them. For every act of kindness I witnessed, my heart felt lighter, but my body did not. The doctors had warned my parents that my recovery was fragile, and they were right. I felt the illness creeping back, the fatigue weighing me down. But I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt peace. One day, as I sat on the porch, my mom brought me a blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders. "Lily," she said softly, her voice catching, "I see it now. You're changing people's lives. I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first." I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. "It's okay, Mom," I said. "You believe me now, and that's what matters." As the weeks passed, more people came to visit me. Some asked for advice, others just wanted to thank me. One woman told me she had decided to forgive her estranged sister after hearing my story. A teenage boy said he'd stopped bullying a classmate because he couldn't stop thinking about the vision of the world I had described. The night I knew would be my last, my family gathered around me. Mom held my hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. Dad sat quietly beside her, his expression somber but proud. Ethan knelt by my bedside, his head resting against my arm. "I love you all," I said, my voice weak but steady. "Don't be sad for me. I'm ready. I did what I was supposed to do." The light began to fill my vision again, soft and welcoming. I felt myself slipping away, but this time there was no fear, only peace. The next morning, the town was quiet, mourning the loss of the girl who had touched their hearts. But the changes she had inspired continued to spread. Her story traveled far beyond the little town, reaching new ears and igniting new sparks of kindness and faith. In the final scene, a child in another town is seen reading a newspaper article about Lily's story. She sets the paper down, turns to her family, and says, "We should help more people." A small act, but one that hints at a brighter future, a world shifting toward hope, one ripple at a time. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.